The silence in the high synod of Valyria was not merely an absence of sound. It was a physical weight, a crushing atmospheric density that pressed against the obsidian ribs of the elder counselors. This was the stillness of a galaxy holding its breath, a terrified pause before the executioner's blade fell. Above them, the holographic dome of the Grand Ocular displayed the terror that had paralyzed their civilization for 10,000 cycles, the severance. It was a tear in the fabric of reality, a jagged wound of violet and bruised black that marred the perfect velvet of the sector. It was not merely a spatial anomaly. It was a graveyard of physics, a plane of existence where logic dissolved into screaming madness. To look upon it with the naked eye was to invite a headache that could crack the carapace. To enter it was a sentence worse than death. The Valyrian Empire, masters of starforging and quantum weaving, had sent probe after probe, fleet after fleet into that abyss. None had returned. The last transmission, received centuries ago from a dreadnought the size of a moon, had been nothing but the weeping of a machine mind begging for deletion. And now, the humans were here to do what the ancient masters could not. High Archon Calith shifted his weight on the dais, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the swirling chaos of the severance displayed above. He felt the ripple of unease pass through the Neuralink that connected the council. It was a collective shudder of disbelief and pity. The humans were so young. They were a species that had barely scraped the mud off their boots before stumbling into the hyperlanes. They were soft, unarmored, fueled by chemical reactions and prone to emotional volatility. They were children playing in a forge, and they had volunteered, no, demanded, to send a pilot into the severance. Calith's mandibles clicked softly, a sound of mourning. He looked to his left, where the representative of the Authari technocracy hovered in a suspension field of blue antigravitons. The Authari were beings of pure logic, circuits integrated into biological sludge, yet even their lights pulsed with a frantic, irregular rhythm. Fear was the universal language, and the severance spoke it fluently. The debate had raged for days, a circular argument of ethics and desperation. Was it murder to let the human go, or was it necessary sacrifice? The severance was expanding. The edges of the wound were bleeding into real space, devouring star systems. If the human failed, they lost nothing but one short-lived creature. If he succeeded, but no one believed he would succeed. The concept was laughable. "It is a waste of biomass," the Authari representative intoned, its voice a synthesized vibration that rattled the crystalline walls. "The trajectory calculations are impossible. The plane of severance does not obey linear time or Euclidean geometry. A biological mind, particularly one as primitive as a human's, will undergo total synaptic collapse within microcycles of entry. We are sanctioning a suicide for the sake of theatricality. These humans wish to prove their worth to the Galactic Concordat, but they do so by throwing themselves into a furnace." Calith signaled for patience, his long, slender fingers tracing the grooves of the council table. He had met the human delegation. He had looked into their soft, binocular eyes. He had expected to see bravado, the foolish arrogance of the ignorant. Instead, he had seen something that unsettled him more than the severance itself, a calm, terrifying stillness. The humans did not look like warriors marching to glory. They looked like engineers walking to a broken circuit breaker. They did not seem to care that the circuit breaker was the mouth of hell. "We have no other options, Authari," Calith replied, his voice a deep thrumming resonance. "We have thrown our best navigators at the plane. We have sent AIs which went mad. We have sent psionic masters whose minds shattered like glass. The humans claim to possess a trait we do not. They call it adaptability, but I fear it is merely a lack of survival instinct. Let them send their pilot. Let them send this Commander Vance. When his ship is torn apart, perhaps the humans will learn the lesson we learned millennia ago. Some doors are not meant to be opened." The council murmured in agreement, a harmonic chord of resignation. They would watch. They would record the data of the human's destruction. They would add his name to the endless memorial of the lost. The great doors of the synod chamber groaned open, the sound echoing like thunder. The human delegation entered. They were small. That was always the first thing Calith noticed. Compared to the towering Valyrians or the floating bulk of the Authari, the humans were dangerously compact. They walked without the grace of anti-grav assistance, their boots striking the polished floor with a rhythmic, primitive thud. There were only 3 of them, 2 diplomats in formal gray attire, and between them the pilot, Commander Elian Vance. Calith leaned forward, his ocular sensors zooming in. Vance did not look like a hero. He was not physically imposing. He wore a flight suit of simple, unadorned white synthetic, void of the medals or ribbons that Valyrian warriors would display. His face was weathered, marked by the slow erosion of time that afflicted his species, his hair the color of iron filings. But it was his eyes that held the room. They were dark, assessing, and utterly devoid of fear. He looked at the High Synod not with awe, but with the polite curiosity of a guest inspecting a strange piece of furniture. He looked at the holographic projection of the Severance, the thing that made Calith's heart skip a beat, and he didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He just watched it, as if reading a language only he understood. "High Archon," the lead human diplomat said, bowing slightly. The voice was soft, melodic, contrasting sharply with the harsh guttural tones of the council. "We are ready. The aperture is fueled and prepped. Commander Vance is prepared to initiate the crossing." The Althari representative floated forward, its lights flashing red. "Prepared? You speak of preparation as if this is a trade route run. Do you comprehend the magnitude of the severance, human? It is not a storm to be weathered. It is a negation of reality. Your sensors will fail, your mind will hallucinate, you will be unmade." Vance stepped forward then. He did not speak loudly, yet his voice cut through the ambient hum of the chamber. "We understand the risks," Vance said. His tone was not defensive, it was factual. "Your data suggests that the severance reflects the observer. It amplifies cognitive dissonance. It feeds on the fear of the unknown, manifesting nightmares from the subconscious of the navigator." Calith was stunned. "You know this, and yet you go." Vance nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "We know it. That is why I am going. You see, Archon, your people, you are perfect. You are ancient, logical, and flawless. You have eliminated chaos from your societies. You fear the darkness because you have lived in the light for so long. Humans, we are different." A ghost of a smile touched Vance's lips, sad and knowing. "We were born in the dark. We carry chaos in our blood. We are not afraid of nightmares because we have spent our entire history fighting them. I am not going there to fight the severance. I am going there to accept it." The silence that followed was different from the one before. It was the silence of confusion. The aliens exchanged glances. This was the human philosophy: to surrender, to walk into the maw of the beast and hope it didn't bite. It was madness. It was the logic of a prey animal, not a starfaring civilization. "Let him go," Calith whispered, a sudden wave of exhaustion hitting him. He felt a strange pang of sorrow for this small, deluded creature. "Initiate the launch protocols. We will observe from the sanctuary." Vance bowed again, deeper this time, a gesture of respect that felt strangely like a farewell. He turned and walked out, his stride steady, never looking back at the map of his doom. As the doors closed, Calith felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. He felt that he had just witnessed the last moments of a species' hope. The humans were brave, yes, but the universe was a graveyard for the brave. The scene shifted to the observation deck, a vast amphitheater orbiting the anomaly at a safe distance. The entire Galactic Concordat was watching. Thousands of ships from 100 species hovered in the void, their sensors trained on the single, tiny speck of white that was the human ship, the Aperture. It was an ugly ship by Valyrian standards, functional, blocky, lacking the elegance of solar sails or gravity curves. It was a dart of titanium and ceramic, built for stress, not beauty. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was quiet. The narrative focus tightened, moving from the grandiose alien perspective into the intimate, claustrophobic reality of a Leon Vance. He was strapped into a chair that looked more like a torture device, surrounded by analog switches and manual overrides. The aliens relied on neural interfaces, but humans knew that in high-radiation zones, thoughts could be hijacked. Physical switches were real. The click of a toggle was a tether to reality. "Control, this is Vance," he said, his voice steady over the comms. "Systems are green, reactor is at 98%, approaching the event horizon of the plane." The voice of Earth Control crackled back, thick with static but laced with a tension that vibrated in the air. "Copy, Vance. You are crossing the threshold in T-10 seconds. Remember, once you cross, we can't help you. The telemetry link will likely sever. You're on your own." Vance closed his eyes for a second. He didn't pray. He didn't think of his family or his home. He thought of the ocean. He thought, the deep, crushing pressure of the Mariana Trench where he had trained. He thought of the silence of the seabed. That was his anchor. "Understood," he said. "Crossing in 3, 2, 1. The universe screamed. To the watchers outside, the Aperture didn't just fly into the purple mist, it vanished. It was as if the ship had been erased from the canvas of existence. On the Valyrian screens, the signal flatlined instantly. "He is gone," the Althari intoned. "Structural integrity failure, total atomization." Calith watched the screen, waiting. He expected the debris. He expected the radiation burst of a dying reactor. But there was nothing, just the swirling, hateful violet of the severance. "Wait," Calith said. "Look at the energy readings, the background radiation, it's dropping." Inside the plane, there was no ship. There was no Vance. There was only sensation. The reality of the severance was not a place, it was a state of being. The walls of the cockpit dissolved into memories. Vance looked at his hands and saw them aging, withering to bone, then blooming into infant flesh, cycling endlessly. The console in front of him became a piano, then a tombstone, then a dashboard of a 20th century car. The monsters the aliens feared began to manifest. They were not dragons or beasts. They were geometric impossibilities, fractals of guilt and regret that spiraled out of the darkness, screaming with the voices of everyone he had ever failed. A Valyrian mind would have snapped here. The sheer illogical nature of it, the fluidity of cause and effect, would have caused a logic cascade failure in their brains. They would have tried to calculate the variable, tried to impose order on chaos, and the chaos would have eaten them. But Vance did not try to calculate. He did not fight. He breathed. He let the hallucinations wash over him like rain. He saw the face of his dead brother screaming in the void, and instead of recoiling, he whispered, "I miss you." He saw the terror of his own death, the cessation of consciousness, and he nodded to it. "I know you are coming," he thought, "but not yet." The humans had a superpower that the ancient races had forgotten: cognitive dissonance. Humans could hold two contradictory thoughts in their heads at the same time and function. They could know they were dying and still fight to live. They could love and hate simultaneously. This fractured internal state, usually a weakness, was the only armor that worked in the severance. The plane tried to break him by showing him his own contradictions, but Vance was human. He was made of contradictions. He was the chaotic element that harmonized with the storm. Slowly, the chaos began to solidify. The plane realized it could not terrify this creature, for the creature was already intimate with its own darkness. The screaming fractals slowed down. The cockpit reassembled itself, but it was different now. The dials were glowing with a golden light. The viewscreen, which had been showing madness, cleared. Vance looked out, and for the first time in history, a biological eye saw the true face of the dangerous plane. It was not a hellscape. It was a web. It was a vast crystalline network of energy strands connecting every point in the universe to every other point. It was the nervous system of the galaxy. The aliens had seen monsters because they approached it with fear. They approached it as an infection to be cured. Vance approached it as a mystery to be explored. The plane was a mirror. It had shown the Authari their own cold lack of soul. It had shown the Valyrians their fear of irrelevance. It showed Vance's potential. "Control," Vance said, his voice echoing not just in his helmet but impossibly across the entire spectrum of the Council's sensors. "I am through. The water is fine." In the High Synod, the silence broke. Alarms screamed, but they were not alarms of danger. They were alarms of overload. The sensors were receiving petabytes of data, more information in a single second than they had gathered in 1,000 years. The holographic map of the severance changed. The angry violet bruise smoothed out, turning into a serene, flowing river of gold and white light. The tier was not a tier, it was a bridge. And in the center of it, stabilizing the entire construct with nothing but his will and his trajectory, was the aperture. Calith stood up, his legs shaking. He stabilized it," the Archon whispered. "He didn't destroy it, he didn't close it, he tamed it." The Authari representative was spinning wildly, its logic processors overheating. "Impossible. The entropy levels are reversing. The chaotic waveforms are synchronizing into a harmonic carrier wave. This is not navigation. This is communion. How is he doing this?" "Because he is not afraid," Calith realized, the epiphany hitting him like a physical blow. "We feared the plane because we feared the loss of control. We feared the unknown. The human, he walked into the unknown and introduced himself." Vance's voice came through again, clear now, amplified by the energies of the plane so that it boomed in the council chamber without the need for translation. "Hi, Archon. I have reached the epicenter. It's a library. It's a storage device. The instability was caused by a data backlog. It was trying to broadcast, but you kept jamming the signal with your fear shields. You were treating a telephone ringing as a bomb exploding." The realization washed over the assembly. The shame was palpable. For 10,000 years, they had cowered before a message. They had sacrificed fleets to silence a greeting. The humans, with their reckless curiosity, had simply picked up the receiver. "Vance," Calith said, his voice trembling with a humility that no High Archon had ever shown. "What is the message? What lies beyond the severance?" "Everything," Vance replied. "The plane connects to the intergalactic void. It's a hyperlane network left by the precursors. But it requires a pilot who can navigate by intuition, not just calculation. It requires a pilot who can feel the current." The aperture began to return, but it did not turn around, it simply expanded. The golden light of the plane flared, and suddenly the ship was emerging from the event horizon, but it was not the same ship. It was glowing, infused with the exotic matter of the realm it had traversed. It glided out of the anomaly, and behind it the jagged tear healed into a perfect, shimmering ring. A gate. A permanent, stable gate. Vance had not just survived the dangerous plane, he had paved it. The return of Elian Vance was not met with cheers, for the moment was too heavy for applause. It was met with a profound, reverent silence. As his ship docked in the Valyrian hangar, the alien honor guards lowered their energy pikes, a gesture reserved for emperors and gods. When the hatch hissed open, steam venting into the chill air, Vance stepped out. He looked tired. He needed a shave. His flight suit was rumpled, but the aura around him had changed. He moved with a fluidity that suggested he was still partly phase-shifted, as if he existed in two places at once. Calith met him on the platform, towering over the human, yet feeling incredibly small. "You have done the impossible, Commander," Calith said. "You have opened the galaxy." Vance shrugged, rubbing the back of his neck. "I just went for a drive, Archon. It was a bit bumpy in the middle, but the view was worth it." "You mock us with your simplicity," Calith said, but there was no anger in it. "We see now, we see what we lacked. We built walls to keep the chaos out. You built a boat to sail on it." Cultural shockwave that followed was instantaneous. The human delegation, previously tolerated as junior partners, became the most sought-after advisors in the Concordat. The Authari wanted to study human neural pathways, convinced they had missed a variable in their evolution. The Valyrians wanted to understand the philosophy of hope, a concept they had discarded as inefficient. But the true climax was yet to come. The gate was open, and the message Vance had unlocked was finally decrypting. Back in the High Synod, the council gathered one last time, with Vance standing in the center. The message from the plane was projected for all to see. It was not a weapon. It was not a warning of doom. It was a star chart, a map of galaxies beyond their own, connected by the network Vance had just rebooted. But there was a metadata tag attached to the map, a signature from the architects of the plane. The Authari deciphered it first, and their representative went completely still, its lights dimming to a whisper. "The signature," the machine mind said. "It matches the genetic markers of the humans." The room erupted in denial. "Impossible," a Valyrian counselor shouted. "Humans are young, they evolved on a backwater rock, they cannot be the precursors." Vance looked at the map, and for the first time he looked surprised. He studied the ancient data, the spiral of the code. "We aren't the precursors," Vance said softly, silencing the room. "Look at the timestamp, it's not from the past." Calith looked. The temporal markers were inverted. The signal wasn't coming from millions of years ago. It was coming from millions of years in the future. "It's us," Vance said, his voice filled with a terrifying awe. "It's humanity, from the future. We built this. We built this network to save the galaxy from the heat death, to stitch the universe together. We sent it back through time, planting the seeds, creating the plane so that we would find it when we were ready." The implications staggered them. The dangerous plane, the monster they had feared, was a time capsule. It was a hand reaching back from the end of time to pull the present forward. And the humans were not just some upstart species. They were the architects of eternity, stuck in a loop of their own making, destined to ascend to a level of power the Valyrians could not comprehend. They were terrified of the humans not because they were primitive, but because, deep down in the genetic memory of the universe, everyone knew what the humans would become. Calith looked at Vance with new eyes. He saw the fragility of the human form, but he also saw the terrifying endurance of the human spirit. He realized why the plane had accepted him. It recognized its father. "The loop is closed," Calith whispered. "You did not just explore the plane, Elian Vance, you inherited it." Vance looked at the shining gate, then back at the aliens who had underestimated him. He didn't gloat. He didn't triumph. He simply nodded, the weight of the future settling on his shoulders. "We have a lot of work to do," he said. "The future is waiting, and it looks like we're driving." The camera pulled back, leaving the council chamber, leaving the station, drifting out into the void where the great golden ring of the Severance shone like a halo against the dark. The fleets of the alien empires turned their prows toward it, following the lead of the tiny, battered human ship. The fear was gone, replaced by a vertigo of infinite possibility. The universe had been small, dark, and frightening, but the humans had turned on the lights. And in the glare of that new dawn, the galaxy realized that the only thing more dangerous than the plane itself was the species crazy enough to call it a highway. The screen faded to black, leaving only the sound of a human heartbeat, steady, rhythmic, and unstoppable, echoing into the eternal silence. The narrative resumed, delving deeper into the aftermath, for the story did not end with the opening of the gate. That was merely the end of the beginning. The weeks following the Severance event saw a radical restructuring of galactic geopolitics. The Valyrian Empire, once the undisputed hegemon, found its authority dissolving not through war, but through obsolescence. Their doctrine of stasis and order had been proven fundamentally flawed. The universe was not a static crystal to be preserved. It was a flowing river, and the humans were the only ones who knew how to swim. On the capital world of Valyria Prime, the streets were filled with whispers. The citizens, tall and chitinous, watched the news feeds with a mixture of horror and fascination. They saw footage of human engineers working alongside Valyrian shipwrights, retrofitting the ancient drives with the new Vance-pattern navigational shields. They saw the humans walking through the halls of the High Synod, not as conquerors but as tutors. It was humiliating yet undeniable. The humans were loud, they were messy, they slept for a third of the day, and they consumed toxic substances like caffeine and ethanol for recreation. Yet, when a warp core threatened to breach, it was the human engineer who ran toward the radiation, shouting instructions, while the Valyrian crew followed protocol and evacuated. Calith, now the primary liaison between the Council and the Human Alliance, spent his days studying Earth history. He sat in his private sanctum, surrounded by floating data shards, reading about the world wars, the Cold War, the climate crises, the early space age. He read about a species that had pointed nuclear weapons at itself for 50 years and somehow managed not to fire. He read about explorers who sailed across oceans without maps, about astronauts who sat on top of explosion-controlled canisters. They are insane, Calith thought, his mandibles twitching. But it is a weaponized insanity. They have weaponized hope. One evening, Vance came to visit Calith's sanctum. The human looked different now. The exposure to the plane had left a mark. His eyes reflected light slightly too much like a cat's, and his movements were too smooth. He sat in a chair designed for a Valyrian, looking small and out of place, yet dominating the room. "You are reading our history," Vance noted, gesturing to the data shards. "It's a bloody read. I wouldn't recommend it for light entertainment." "I am trying to understand," Calith said. "Your species is a paradox. You are violent, tribal, and short-sighted, yet you possess a capacity for self-sacrifice that defies evolutionary logic. Why? Why did you go into the plane, Elian? You said it was curiosity, but I saw your bioscans. You were terrified. Your cortisol levels were lethal. Why did you go?" Vance looked out the window at the violet sky of Valyria Prime. "There's an old story on Earth," he said, "about a box, Pandora's box. A woman opens a jar she isn't supposed to, and all the evils of the world fly out. Sickness, death, war, but there was one thing left at the bottom of the box." Hope, Calith guessed. He had read the myth. "No," Vance said, turning to look at the alien. "That's the sanitized version. The thing at the bottom was foreknowledge, knowing exactly when and how you will die. The Greeks thought that was the worst cure. See, of all, if you know how the story ends, you stop playing. We humans, we don't know, we never know. We live in a state of constant uncertainty. And because we don't know if we'll survive tomorrow, we fight like hell to make sure we do. The Severance, it was just another tomorrow. Scary, sure, but better than the alternative." "Which was?" "Stagnation," Vance said. "We saw you, the Valyrians, the Authari. You have lived for thousands of years and you haven't changed. You've been managing your decline. We would rather burn out than fade away." The conversation was interrupted by a priority alert from the gate. The Authari were detecting a new signal, not a map this time, a visitor. The scene shifted to the gate perimeter. The ring was pulsing with a rhythmic golden heartbeat. Something was coming through from the other side, from the future or the deep beyond. The combined fleets formed a defensive cordon, weapons locked. Old habits died hard. The Valyrian dreadnoughts charged their particle lances, the Authari spheres spun up their disintegration fields. The human ships, however, did something else. They opened their communication channels. They broadcast music. Bach. The Goldberg variations. "What are you doing?" the Authari commander demanded over the fleetcom. "You are revealing our tactical positions." "I'm saying hello," the human fleet admiral replied. "If they can travel through that gate, your guns won't hurt them anyway. Might as well be polite." The object that emerged was not a ship. It was a city. A spire of white stone and living light, kilometers high, drifting effortlessly through the vacuum. It had no engines, no exhaust. It moved by manipulating the fabric of space around it. As it cleared the gate, it sent a signal. It was a video transmission overriding every screen in the fleet. The face that appeared was human, but it was a human evolved. The skin was metallic, gold-flecked, the eyes were solid light, but the smile was unmistakable. It was the smile of a parent looking at a child who has just taken their first step. "Welcome," the being said. The voice was a chorus of thousands, yet singular. "We have been waiting for you to turn the key. I am, let us say, a distant descendant of Commander Vance. We are the Ascendancy. We are what you become when you stop being afraid of the dark." The revelation rocked the fleet. The Valyrians lowered their weapons, their antennae drooping in awe. The Athari logic cores spun in circles, trying to process a causality loop where the primitive humans were also the advanced gods. The future human continued. "The universe is dying, entropy is winning, the stars are burning out. We have built a new home in a new pocket of reality where the laws of physics are kinder. The gate is the door, but we could not open it from the inside. It had to be opened from the past by an act of pure, irrational courage, by a leap of faith." The being looked directly at Vance, who was watching from the bridge of the aperture. "Thank you, grandfather," the being said. "The path is open. The great migration can begin." The twist was not just that humans were the future. It was that the aliens, the Valyrians, the Athari, the dozens of other races, were also part of the plan. The future humans had not come to save only themselves. "We have room for everyone," the being said. "The Valyrian capacity for order will be needed to build the foundations. The Athari logic will be needed to maintain the weave. Humanity provided the spark, but the fire requires all of us." The scale of the ending expanded outward. It was no longer a story about a pilot and a plane. It was a story about the end of an era and the beginning of a new epoch. The fear that had defined the galaxy, the fear of the severance, transformed into a collective purpose. The dangerous plane was the womb of a new universe. In the final scenes, we saw the mobilization. We saw Valyrian haulers carrying billions of colonists toward the gate. We saw Athari databanks uploading their entire civilizational history into the future city's archives. And we saw Alian Vance, standing on the observation deck of the station, watching the ship stream past him like a river of diamonds. Calith stood beside him. The ancient alien looked younger somehow. The burden of 10,000 years of fear had been lifted. "You are not going?" Calith asked. Vance shook his head. "Not yet. Someone has to keep the lights on this side until the last ship is through. Someone has to make sure the door doesn't close." "That is a lonely task, Alian." "I'm used to it," Vance said. "Besides, I have a feeling there are other gates, other dark places on the map that need a visit. Now that we know how to drive, I kind of want to see what else is out there." Calith laughed, a sound that was rare and raspy. "You humans, you are given paradise and you choose to stay in the construction zone." "Paradise is boring," Vance said, grinning. "No risk, no surprise, you." "Go, Calith, go see the future. I'll stick around and make sure the past behaves." The final image was of the aperture, repaired and upgraded with shining future tech, detaching from the station. It fired its engines, not the clean, silent drives of the Ascendancy, but the roaring, defiant chemical thrusters of Earth. It banked away from the fleet, heading not toward the gate, but away from it, toward the dark, unexplored rim of the galaxy where the stars were thin and the mysteries were deep. The voiceover returned, the voice of the future human echoing across time. They called him the only person who went on the dangerous plane. They were afraid of him because he represented the chaos they tried to suppress. But he was amazing not because he conquered the chaos. He was amazing because he loved it. And in loving the chaos, he gave us the stars. The screen faded to black, leaving a final, lingering resonance of the engine roar, fading into the heartbeat of the universe. The story held its breath in the aftermath of the broadcast, a stillness that spanned parsecs. The narrative then zoomed in on the societal integration that followed, the friction and the fusion. It was necessary to show that unity was not a magic spell, but a difficult, grinding process of diplomacy. The middle act of this new era was defined by the Council of the Threshold. The humans, now the de facto leaders of the Exodus, found themselves in a position they found uncomfortable: management. Humanity was a species of explorers and disruptors, not bureaucrats. Yet the Valyrians looked to them for every decision. This dynamic created a fascinating tension. The humans tried to teach the aliens independence. The aliens tried to teach the humans consistency. We witnessed a scene in the Great Hall of the Threshold Station. A human engineer, Sarah, was arguing with a Valyrian fabricator. You can't just route the power through the secondary coupling, the Valyrian insisted, waving a datapad. The safety protocols require a triple redundancy check. We don't have time for triple redundancy, Sarah yelled back, wiping grease from her forehead. The solar flare is hitting the transport sector in 20 minutes. If we don't boost the shields now, those ships burn. Bypass the safety. Trust the math. Trust is not a metric. It is today. Do it. The Valyrian hesitated, his instincts screaming against the violation of protocol. But he looked at Sarah's face, the fierce, desperate determination. He bypassed the safety. The shields flared gold just as the solar wave hit. The ships were saved. The Valyrian looked at the readout, trembling. It held, efficiency increased by 40%, but the risk probability was 0, Sarah said, slumping against the console, because I wasn't going to let it fail. This became the mantra of the new alliance. I wasn't going to let it fail. The aliens learned that human luck was actually a combination of hyperfocus and a refusal to accept defeat. They began to adopt it. We saw young Valyrians taking risks in flight simulations. We saw Authari AIs writing poetry to process their data streams. The culture was hybridizing. But the story required a final, darker test. The larger twist hinted at in the prompt had to be more than just the future humans. There had to be a reason the future humans were fleeing the current universe. Entropy was the slow killer, but there was a fast killer, too. Deep in the void, far behind the Exodus fleet, something woke up. The Great Filter wasn't a concept, it was a predator. The entities that lived in the gaps between galaxies, the ones that had eaten the precursors, noticed the gate. They noticed the light. The alarms on Vance's ship, deep in the rim, began to scream. He wasn't exploring for fun, he was patrolling. He knew that opening a door lets in guests, but it also lets in drafts, and sometimes wolves. Vance contacted the threshold. Calith, we have a problem, shadow mass signatures, inbound, fast. The council froze. The joy of the Exodus evaporated. The old fear returned. But this time, Calith stood up. He didn't look at the Authari for odds. He didn't look at the tactical display with despair. He looked at the human admiral. What would Vance do? Calith asked. The admiral grinned, a predatory baring of teeth. He'd punch it in the nose. Then let us punch, Calith said. The Act 3 climax was a space battle of conceptual proportions. The enemy was not made of matter. It was made of anti-reality. It sought to unmake the gate, to sever the connection to the future. The Allied fleet, a ragtag mix of Valyrian battleships, Authari spheres, and human cruisers, formed a line. They couldn't kill the enemy, but they could hold it back. They had to buy time for the civilian fleet to cross. Vance returned to the fight. His ship, the Aperture, came screaming out of warp, trailing exotic energy. He drove straight at the leading shadow entity. You can't engage that, Control shout. Ed, it absorbs kinetic energy. I'm not using kinetic energy, Vance yelled. I'm using the plane. Vance activated the experimental drive he had been testing. He didn't fire a weapon. He opened a micro-rift. He vented the chaotic energy of the dangerous plane directly into the face of the static order of the void predators. It was like spraying fire with liquid oxygen. The reaction was catastrophic. The shadow entity recoiled, its form destabilizing. They don't like the taste, Vance laughed. They want quiet, ordered matter to eat. They choke on chaos. The tactics spread. The fleet stopped firing lasers and started firing instability. They weaponized the very thing they used to fear. The Valyrians, masters of order, learned to unleash disorder. They fired warp core breaches. They detonated singularity bombs. They fought like humans. The enemy broke. It didn't die, but it retreated, slinking back into the dark spaces, confused and burned by the ferocity of this new, hybrid civilization. The line held. The last civilian transport crossed the gate. The future human avatar appeared on the comms one last time. The door is closing, it said. The physics of this universe can no longer support the bridge. You must come through now. The military fleet turned to the gate. One by one, the battered ships slipped through into the golden light of the new universe. Calith's flagship waited. Vance, Calith hailed. Come, the door is closing. Vance's ship hovered near the collapsing rift. Go ahead, Calith. I'm right behind you. Calith's ship crossed. The light swallowed him. But Vance didn't follow. On the bridge of the Aperture, Vance watched the gate shrink. The readings on his console were red. His drive was burned out from the fight with the shadows. He couldn't make the jump. He had known that when he engaged the enemy. "Commander," the ship's AI queried. "Trajectory unsynchronized, we will be stranded." "I know," Vance said. He leaned back in his pilot's chair, pulling a flask of terrestrial whiskey from his pocket. He took a sip. It burned, grounding him. "Why did you lie to the Archon?" the AI asked. "Because he wouldn't have gone if he knew I was staying," Vance said. "He's a sentimental old bug." The gate flickered and died. The golden light vanished. The dangerous plane was sealed. The connection to the future was cut, leaving the Ascendancy safe in their new realm. Vance was alone in a dying universe, surrounded by the retreating shadows and the cold stars. "Status?" Vance asked. "Life support 40%, the AI replied. "Fuel 10%. Nearest habitable system 400 light years. Probability of survival 0.0001%. Vance smiled. The silence of the cockpit was heavy, but it wasn't empty. He looked out at the vast, uncaring dark. "So you're saying there's a chance?" he whispered. He reached for the controls. He wasn't going to just drift. He was a human. He was the anomaly. He was the one everyone was afraid of because he refused to accept the end. "Plot a course," Vance said, his voice strong. "To where, Commander?" "To the shadows," Vance said. "They retreated. That means they have a home, and if they have a home, they have resources. We're not done yet." The aperture fired its maneuvering thrusters, turning not toward safety, but toward the deepest, darkest part of the void. The engines flared, a tiny spark of defiance in the infinite night. The legend of Elian Vance did not end with the Exodus. In the new universe, the humans and aliens told stories of the ghost of the old world. They said that if you listened closely to the background static of the cosmos, you could sometimes hear a human laugh and the roar of an engine that refused to die. They said that the shadows didn't eat the old universe. They said the old universe was conquered by a single man who was too stubborn to quit. And in the great archives of the Ascendancy, under the statue of the first pilot, the inscription read, "Here lies the fear of the dark. It was slain by the only person who went on the dangerous plane and found it beautiful." The screen went black for the final time. The audience was left not with a conclusion, but with a challenge. The story wasn't about escaping reality, it was about facing it no matter the odds. It was the ultimate HFY statement. Humanity does not just survive the impossible, we domesticate it. We make the monster a pet. We make the abyss a highway. And even when the lights go out, we make our own way home.